Welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Time to talk matters Africa. This week we host Biola Alabi, an African media expert. She shares her views on media and media growth across the African continent. We get your views on the issues as well. And we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. As the world goes digital, what next for media across the African continent? We're happy to host this week on the show Biola Alabi, who's an African media expert and the managing partner of Biola Alabi Media Consulting. Biola Alabi served as the managing director of Electronic Media Network, MNET, from 2009 to 2014. She oversaw 4 editions of the popular reality series Big Brother Africa and created the Face of Africa final in Lagos in 2010, as well as the first ever Africa Magic Viewers' Choice Awards in 2013. Biola was listed as one of the 20 youngest power women in Africa by Forbes in 2013. Let's get to her insights on media, production and content in Africa. Biola, thank you so much for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Thank you.
Now, you've had an illustrious career in the media, and there's a huge challenge that Africa faces of content development. Now, Nollywood seems to have got it right, and we'll come back to the success and the lessons from Nollywood. But what are your thoughts on how we can best grow content development, particularly in terms of TV, movies, television shows across Africa?
Well, I think sort of the biggest opportunity actually now is in the digital conversion. So when analog signals go off and digital terrestrial goes across the continent, I think there's a huge opportunity there. The reason being that there are going to be so much more opportunities for content to actually get out on air. And then there's going to also be much more selections. And there are also going to be more people that want to create the right type of content and the best type of content. So you're going to see much more excellence being coming across. So I think the opportunity actually lies in the new developments that are going to be coming across from digital technology. But really, what type of lessons do we need to learn? We need to learn how to actually develop our content and tell our stories. Mm-hmm. We've never really been empowered to tell our stories because our stories have been told from so many different prisms before. And I think this is some of the stuff that Nollywood has gotten right. But in Kenya also, when I've worked in Kenya, it's been amazing working with creators there around storytelling, around telenovela. One of the amazing things about Kenya is the drama sector. The drama series sector is really well developed. But also when you look at places like Tanzania, telling their own story in the local languages also have been very empowering. So telling Kiswahili stories in Kiswahili has been also a great way of empowering people. So I think when we start to tell our stories in our own languages, but also our stories start to travel across the continent. And once again, these are some places where Nollywood has been able to overcome those barriers.
It certainly has. And let's look at governments and the government role in all this, particularly in the digital the transformation and the change that will happen under digital. Do you think governments are fully aware and prepared for the changes that are coming?
I think governments are very much aware. I think when it comes to preparedness, I think some of the biggest challenges we're going to face is around subsidies. How are we going to subsidize these set-top boxes that are going to be needed across the continent? We are still a very young continent. We're still growing from an economical perspective, and those boxes actually are normally subsidized across the across the world. So when you're looking at that, those are places where we have some challenges, and we're going to have challenges everywhere, not just in any particular country across the continent. And also when you look at the number of television households across the continent, it's still quite low penetration rate. I think we're still at 30%, and we're hoping that those are going to grow. But I think in the next 5 years, those are projected to grow quite widely because of the growing of the middle class. So I think those are places where government is prepared, government knows, but then also there is still the funding perspective where are we going to get the funding to subsidize these boxes.
Okay, and moving on from government to the private sector, for instance, in Kenya, there's been some resistance from the media or clear interest, the media wants to be part and parcel of the digital transformation and is fighting for that role. But, is the private sector fully prepared for the change, do you think?
I'm not sure the private sector understands the change that is coming, and I'm not sure that advertisers and sponsors actually realize the huge opportunity coming. I think if they realize the opportunity, they will support actually content creation, and also investors would invest more in content creation. The biggest problem we have around content creation is there are enough people investing in it. So most people that are independent producers cannot get financing for their work. They cannot get financing for their products. But what people don't understand is when you invest in content, there is an evergreen, and there is a long tail. So also you have to wait for that to sort of bring in the return on your investment. But it's a long tail, but content lives on forever. I mean, we currently, across the continent are acquiring tons of library content from international libraries that are bringing them so much yield, which is why a lot of content owners around the globe, big studios, are able actually to make their projections and make their monies. These are some of the best times for big studios around the world because they've created these content over the last 100 years, over the last 50 years. And this content now lives in so many different places over the top with the introduction of broadband. And that's why Netflix is sort of the talk of the day every day. That's why Amazon is going into the content business. Google is going into the content business. Apple wants a piece of the content business. But that content had to be created and someone had to invest in that. And that's really where we need to make sure that people understand the story that is about to happen in Africa and where the opportunity is going to lie, and we need to get that investment in so we can create that content.
For the people watching who don't understand the long tail, explain it in the simplest terms.
Basically what it means is you need patient capital to invest in content because it takes time for content to actually be syndicated. So for example, your show is now on a broadcast. I think you're now syndicated on a couple of other cable networks, a couple of satellite networks. This is where content starts to generate revenue. So it's really important that people understand that, okay, just because there's a great idea and there's a show there's a content that can be created, but the content might take 5 years or 3 years. And sometimes it can take 2 years for you to start to see some return on that investment. But you have to be able to invest for that amount of time.
Patient capital is what it needs. So a lot of independent producers are watching and saying, we really struggle. Sometimes they feel like giving up. What's your message to people out there, whether they're independent producers, also talent, people who work for independent producers and kind of wondering, should I stay in this industry or do I just give up because the money right now is not that great? What would your message to them?
I think, one of the biggest opportunities, and I think this is a great success story for the continent, is what's happened in Nollywood. So Nollywood was building its library over the last 20 years without really having very, very few windows of distribution, which was really basically DVD sales. That was the only distribution model. And then came pay TV. So the last 10 years, pay TV came into the picture, and then those libraries that were created for only one window of distribution now had multiple distributions opportunities. And then OTT came in, and now there are even more opportunities. So content that was created 20 years ago is finding a second life, a third life, and guess what? They will continue to find more and more lives as we move, as different distribution opens up across the continent. So I think the good story is the fact that this is happening. We've seen this happen. We have seen success stories, and Nollywood has been leading that. But guess what? There are so many more stories to tell on the continent. So my advice to producers, people that are telling our story on the continent, people that are changing the self-confidence of Africans through our stories, people that are that have had people like Lupita come through their system, should continue to create these stories, continue to breed these amazing talent, continue to showcase Africa in the way that you see your Africa, because no one can tell your story the way you can. But that content is always going to be valuable. We have the diaspora that is dying for content, which is why OTT is really taking off. We have people that are actually, I think Netflix is doing some licensing deals in Africa now for African content. So I think what we need to always understand is content will always have a life, and by building your library, you will always have an outlet to sell your content.
The message is don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
What are you most optimistic about when you look at the continent?
What I'm most excited about is the youth of Africa. I know that it is sort of for most government, it is sort of their headache, but it also is the biggest opportunity we have. There are tons of people that are out there that are going to be looking for work. And the beautiful thing about this industry, when it comes to television, broadcasting, film, is there's so many opportunities. So there's skilled, there's unskilled, there's learning on the job. But also what happens is through these industries, we're able to create multiple streams of employment. So you have primary employment, you have tertiary employment, you have so many people throughout the distribution chain. So for example, on a set of a film, you have to have catering. So you're creating jobs for more and more people. So I think for me, that's the biggest opportunity, is there's so many jobs that can be created in this industry. In Nigeria, the industry contributes over 1 million jobs to our economy. When we did our rebasing of understanding what our GDP was, the film and television and entertainment industry contributed $5.1 billion to our economy in Nigeria.
Incredible.
This is really a great story to tell. But what I know is this is the story we can start to tell across the continent. In places like Tanzania, if we start to quantify how many movies, what the value of this industry is, what the value of the technical part of the industry. Remember, when it comes to broadcasting, when it's going to come to DTT, there's so much hardware that also goes in. There are installers that are employed through the value chain. So for me, I feel like this is an amazing industry, and I think we have the potential to develop the African industry to be bigger than the American industry, to be bigger than what's happening in Latin America. So for me, I feel this is such a great optimistic time. However, what we have to do is start to collaborate across borders. Try to tell our stories, but make our stories continental. Right. Find ways to tell the stories. We can use subtitles, we can use dubbing, but we need to make sure we're telling those stories, and we need to be exchanging those skills across the continent. There's amazing skill development in places like Kenya when it comes to technical stuff around drama. There's amazing skills in South Africa. There are some amazing skills when it comes to acting in front of the camera in Nigeria. Let's start to bring all that stuff together and create an amazing industry.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Let's go back to government for a moment, and the fact that, you know, if you look at a lot of developed countries, government has in a way subsidized and supported the growth of content. For instance, you'll find BBC supporting historical dramas and you know, all that kind of stuff. What role and responsibility do you think governments should play in trying in some way to grow this sector?
Look, I would love to say that they have, I mean, there's a huge responsibility. There's a huge responsibility on our governments to make sure that we preserve our history, that our stories are told, and that actually we create historical, and documentaries are really important because these are educational, they're informative, and these are ways, amazing ways of making sure we don't forget the things that have happened. So there is a huge role to play there, but I think we have to be realistic about the government plates in Africa. Governments have so many things on their plates, and I think in as much as we can get private sector to understand the commitment, especially to our historical past, that we need to preserve, and we need to preserve that because we have this huge population of youth on the continent. So I think that is important. I think that where we can, from a policy perspective, we can get policies that are conducive, so that we can get economic policies made. So let's have some credits that can be given to people telling these stories. Let's have tax credits, incentives. If we can do that, I think those are the things that we can push with governments. But I really think when it comes to subsidies or when it comes to grants, and I just think there's so much that we need to be realistic about really what the African governments are facing. We have huge infrastructure challenges on the continent that people want to face. We have huge unemployment issues that we need to face. We need to create inclusive growth. So I think there's a lot going on. And if you ask any president, and I've had the opportunity to talk to some presidents and some ministers, they will tell you, Biola, we love what you people do in the broadcasting and entertainment industry, but we really believe that this is going to be a place where the private sector can play a huge role. And I think so. I think when as we develop more from a consumer good perspective, there's going to be much more advertising opportunities. There's going to be much more sponsorship opportunities, and those are avenues in which you can tell some amazing stories. And I mean, one of the things that happens in places like the U.S. and places like in the U.K. is that their public broadcasters have huge support from the private sector. So I remember one of the most amazing things on PBS, which is the public broadcasting system in America, was ExxonMobil sponsored Masterpiece Theater, which was basically bringing historical theater to life, and in dramas on, I know it was every Sunday night. They sponsor opera, which is supporting art. The BBC, you'll see tons of companies that also support a lot of the programming on the BBC. So I think this is a place where we actually need to take to task a lot of our private sector.
Right, message to the private sector. If you're watching, what role are you playing? And the importance of this, just to emphasize, is many of us grew up, you know, in an era where we watched a lot of the programs from our former colonial masters.
Yes.
You grew up very anglicized, or you grew up extremely French, you know, and this is the challenge that Africa faces, is redefining then who we are. So as we come to the close, what do you see in terms of the industry in the next 5 to 10 years? Can you project?
Well, I mean, what we have is we have data. So all the data is telling us that television households are going to be growing by 50%. We know that pay TV and people that are going to be getting some sort of digital feed is going to grow by 40% across the continent in the next 5 years. So which means there are going to be many more houses connected to information. That information is going to be coming in. What we know is when people are empowered with information, that means there's much more better decision making. So people are going to understand their governments better. They're going to understand what's happening around them. And guess what? There's a huge opportunity from an educational perspective. How do we use media to educate people? So I really see that there's going to be many, many more channels around education, formal education, informal education. We have this youth population that we have to keep informed and educated. So I really see that the television, broadcasting, media industry as a whole as a bright future. All the data points to huge growth, and so I think the key is for advertisers, for sponsors, for private sector to really get involved now, support people that are telling stories, support the creative industry where you can and where we can create jobs. I mean, there is no reason if we can create 1 million jobs in Nigeria in the creative industry, we can do that across the continent. So how do we create more jobs? And I think these are the dialogues and questions I want to be having with policymakers, with governments, with ministers to say, let's try to replicate some of the stuff that has happened in Nigeria around the creative industry across the continent, and I'm excited about that opportunity.
Before we close and go to your final statement and your thoughts delivered to Africa, what did Nollywood get right and how can it be replicated? What are the things that you saw maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago that worked, that we could start doing in countries that are not really developing content?
I mean, the one thing that I think that Nollywood did right was they did not wait for the government. It was everything happened in spite of the government. And I mean, not that in the end, I mean, later on there was some engagement, but I think Nollywood really happened because of the tenacity of the creative and the entrepreneurs. And I think entrepreneurship plays a huge role in how to create an industry. I always tell people that it's very good to be creative, it's very important to have amazing ideas, but we always have to make sure that there's a revenue model. There has to be a financial piece to this because it does cost money to create this stuff. So I think Nollywood had an amazing blend of the creative energy, but also the entrepreneurship that went along with that. And I think that has been and distribution. They created their own distributions channels. Because what happened in Nigeria is because of just many reasons, there weren't the cinema culture had really sort of collapsed. There weren't really cinemas anymore, which traditionally people think of films and cinema going together. But then also technology. So with technology, we were able to use very, very easy technology to make digital films, and they were able to distribute those digital films on DVDs and VCDs. And VCDs are really DVDs from China. So I think there was a lot of technology that came together. There was tenacity, there was entrepreneurship, and it was all done in spite of government. No one waited for the government.
I remember in university in the 90s, my Nigerian friends with their video, it was video cassettes
yes.
And they were really in demand. But another interesting thing is that a lot of my Nigerian friends watched a lot of Indian movies. They didn't understand the language. They appreciated
the storytelling. And I think that was also a big inspiration to Nollywood, was that if the Indians can tell their story, we can also tell our stories. But we also borrowed and learned a lot from that, because it was, if you lived in Nigeria, you grew up on Indian films. Even on the public broadcaster, there was an Indian film every evening or on Sunday nights, and it was usually a blockbuster for us anyway. I don't know, I think it was library content from Bollywood, but it was fresh content for us. And that is, once again, what I always tell people, that what is old content to you is fresh content to someone else. And so content will always find another life. And I mean, we've had these conversations with many independent producers that your content will always live on. That's why you should make sure your content is the best, because the quality of your content is what determines how long it will live on.
Your library has value, create quality content, and it lives on. Thank you so much for your insights, Biola. Please look into the camera. Africa is, they say, rising, and there are those who say, we don't see it rising, but everybody wants to know, what role can I play on this continent? What message do you have generally for Africa?
I think for me, this is such an exciting time to be on the continent. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And one of the things I know is that Africa is rising, and we have everything we need to rise. We have an amazing population that is going to take us to the next level. We have people that are willing to work. We have people that want to work. And I think the biggest thing for us is how do we create more jobs? And we need to look everywhere on how to create those jobs. We need to look within us. We need to look outside of us. We need to bring in partners where we can. But the real big thing is how do we support small to medium enterprises? And how do we have the next generation of entrepreneurs that are actually going to be employing people and creating jobs and actually creating huge incomes for this continent? And I think that is the biggest thing for me. But I am excited about Africa's future. I believe that it is time for us to continue to tell our story, to strengthen our story, but make sure that our story is told on a global level. And this is the time, and I'm excited that people are telling our story. And please continue to tell the African story and continue to empower people. And please continue to create businesses that do create jobs, because that is the biggest thing we need right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
What a fascinating interview. I hope you've learned a lot from that, particularly if you are in the business of production. Now let's get to your views on the issues.
This week, we asked you, how is technological innovation likely to impact on the development of African states? Justin Jallo says, the simplest meaning of development is a positive change. Technological innovation will lead to that change in Africa through creation of employment, improvement of standards of living, expansion of foreign exchange earnings, and increase in national income.
Hi, my name is Momindomo and I'm watching African Leadership Dialogues from Imaradaima in Nairobi. What I think about tech innovations and its impact on African development is that it's offering even less developed countries a window of opportunity to leapfrog the industrialization stage and transform their economies into a high value added information economy. Hence, they can compete on a global level with advanced economies.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature countries that have adopted the latest technologies. The technological readiness pillar measures the agility with which an economy adopts existing technologies to enhance the productivity of its industries, with specific emphasis on its capacity to fully leverage information and communication technologies, ICTs, in daily activities and production processes for increased efficiency and enabling innovation for competitiveness. Its rank is out of a possible 7. Starting us off at number 10 is Côte d'Ivoire with an index of 4.4 and ranked 92nd globally. Coming in at number 9 is Zambia with an index of 4.5 and a global ranking at number 88. Taking the number 8 spot is Gambia. Ranked at number 82 on the global chart, Gambia has an index of 4.6. Positioned at number 7 is Senegal. The West African state takes the 68th spot on the global chart with an index of 4.97. Seychelles takes the number 6 spot. The small island nation is ranked at number 65 globally with an index of 4.98. Slotted in at number 5 is Morocco with an index of 5.1 and a global ranking at position 57. At number 4 is Kenya. Ranked 55th globally, Kenya has an index of 5.1. Namibia comes in at number 3. The South African country is ranked 54th globally with an index of 5.1. Coming in at number 2 is Rwanda with an index of 5.3 and a global ranking at position 48. And at number 1 this week is South Africa. Ranked at number 39 globally, South Africa has an index of 5.5. And that is Africa's Top 10 this week.
We've come to the close of the show, and it's been a difficult ride for so many producers across many countries in Africa, but this could be the year when things change. But let's take some words of wisdom as we close the show. As always, we have an African proverb. And this one goes, you always learn a lot more when you lose than when you win. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.